You're listening to the Dudes and Dads Podcast, a show dedicated to helping men be better dudes and dads by building community through meaningful conversation and storytelling. And now, here are your hosts, Joel DeMott and Andy Lehman.
Joel, welcome back. I'm super excited about this episode here. Our guest today is one that I've been following for a long time. He's a podcaster also, so I've been following him and for the longest time wanted him to get him on our show. So yeah, I'm excited about this episode, Joel.
It's like we get to have our heroes on this show. You know, that's what I love. And when Andy, I've just become convinced that there's just a really lot of interesting people out there, and the more of them that we can get to share their story, it just makes for a good time, especially when we're all cooped up inside our houses right now, and we need to believe that there's a different way ahead of us, maybe the promise of a different kind of future. And so we're going to get outside the house on this episode, so to speak. So yeah, looking forward to it. So Andy, let's find out who we got with us.
All
tonight.
right, so this week we have Jason Epperson. Jason is a dad, he's a husband, and he's a full-time RVer. And so that's kind of what kicked me off for this, because I love camping and I would love to do full-time RVing. And so I thought, hey, what better person to have on the show than Jason? So hey, Jason, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So right now, I'm just going to have to ask, you look like you're in a lot warmer weather than we are. So where are you at?
I am in the Verde Valley, or actually it's the Verde Valley. It's spelled Verde, and it's named because of the greenness of the area, but they call it the Verde Valley here in Arizona.
That sounds like white people just mispronounced it and then it stuck. That's what it sounds.
We got a little trouble on our podcast for it because we kept calling it Verde. There's another town in Texas, Blanco, Texas. It's not Blanco, it's Blanco, and don't you dare say it wrong. This was Mexico at one point. All right, I know. I took Spanish. This is Verde. Anyway. It's been over 90 degrees for the last 5 or 6 days here. And we came up from Tucson about 6 weeks ago, where it's much hotter down there now. And you know, Arizona has a lot of higher country, so we went up in elevation, and now we're starting to look at when can we go up in elevation again, because it's going to be in the 90s for the foreseeable future. But I'll take it over 30s and 40s any day.
Right. You guys originally originated from Chicago, so you understand the kind of weather that we're going through in Indiana here.
Right.
It's crazy.
I lived in Chicago for 16 years, but I also grew up in Western Illinois. So
gotcha.
Midwest is in the Midwest, though, I feel like the forecasts are much more accurate. As much as we complained about them when I lived back there, here they'll say it's gonna rain one day and it doesn't. They'll say it's not gonna and it's gonna pour. They'll say it's gonna be 80 and it's 95. It's all over the place. Anyway, I'll take it.
Yeah. So I mentioned that you are a full-time RVer. How long have you guys been on the road?
It'll be 4 years, September 1st.
Awesome. So what kind of got you out and going on the road? What made you what helped you make that decision to go full-time?
So when we lived in Chicago, I was working 2 full-time jobs, and I was to be crude, I was making over $100,000, but barely able to make ends meet, and barely seeing my kids, and that was a real challenge for us. And one of my jobs was as a professor at a college, and that was a 5-year contract that ended. So I was looking for new ways to make money, and we built this website that was a news website for the performing arts in Chicago. We were, my wife and I, Abby, we were both in the theater community in Chicago heavily, and we built sort of this niche news website for Chicago theater and performing arts, and that slowly started to become our primary job, and I ended up leaving the other full-time job I had, and at that point, we realized that we weren't tied down to anything. So the intent wasn't to go full time right away. We just thought we would travel a lot
Hmm.
because we could work remotely. And we actually had started watching lots of videos on YouTube of people building out school buses into RVs. We thought we'd never have the money to build an RV or to buy an RV, that we, at least that would fit our family. You know, we have three
Hmm.
kids, and we wanted them to all have their own bunks and not something, like a dinette you have to convert or something like
Sure.
that. So we built out exactly what we wanted into a school bus conversion. I did that over the course of a summer. We did it in February. We began it in February, and over the summer I was building it. And in the meantime, our landlord told us that they were raising our rent by $400 that year, and we were already paying like $1,500 a month.
Man.
So we thought, well, I don't know, maybe we'll just when we get the RV finished, we'll just move into it for a little bit, maybe a year, maybe what have you, And then we did September 1st of that year. It wasn't quite finished. We were still doing some building on the way, and we started traveling, and we haven't stopped since.
So, Jason, I clearly a jack of all trades here, my friend. The ability, because I know for myself now, like I did house framing in college, and
Yeah,
I consider myself relatively handy. But
yeah.
to go from college professor to bus overhauler and full-time RVer, was there? I mean, what's the learning curve on these things?
Well, the thing I was teaching in college is technical theater and lighting design. So I was already doing sort of a lot of construction and electrical stuff. The thing that I was totally clueless about is anything automotive.
Mhm.
Not a clue. I've always been sort of, that's never been in my wheelhouse, not something that I really got into. And then I go buy this. I mean, we literally drove to Ohio and bought this bus, and I drove it back. And Abby's trying to figure out where we're going to park it on the way back. And she's like calling different storage yards and stuff. So I was, and I let alone being clueless about a gas engine, a giant diesel bus, I had no clue about. But so the build out stuff was easy. It was sort of more the maintenance along the way that I was really having to learn uh, on a whim. But you sort of get scrappy. You get thrown into an environment like that, and you just have to learn. And thankfully, there's things out there like YouTube. I don't know where we would be today without
Right.
YouTube
Yeah.
to teach us how to do absolutely everything.
Yeah, I just and that's for our listeners, the so be, because like you said, when you're thrown into a situation, like necessity is the mother of invention,
Yeah.
would you feel that just like did it feel like some certain pressures in your life sort of kind of all came together at the time to make this opportunity available to you? Like, do you, if things had not been kind of if you hadn't had the rent go up, and if your contract hadn't ended and these sort of things, do you think things would have gone a different way than what they ended up going?
100%. I think it all was, it all came together exactly, whatever you believe in, but exactly as there maybe was
Mhm.
a plan for or something. It
Yeah.
just it just sort of worked out really well. And then we hit the road, and we sort of were able to um, use some of those. We continued our theater website, and then we started building out, a lot of what we do now based on what we learned from that.
Mhm.
So that was sort of like the precursor to it. So now, with our websites and blogs and podcasts and stuff, we've sort of learned all the social media techniques and learned building websites and all that sort of. I didn't have a clue about building a website, but I just sort of learned that again from YouTube, and went from there.
YouTube is definitely one of the best things. I know, like podcasting for me, I've learned that doing YouTube and watching lots of videos too, and I've been doing it for
Yep.
a while. But yeah. So let's talk a little bit about parenting on the road. That's got to be something completely different for me because I've gone on road trips. We took a 2-week road trip a year ago, and like by the end of the week, we were like all ready in each other's hair. But like, how does that look for you guys as far as parenting and like? Uh, specifically, let's even talk right now about spending time with your kids. Like, do you have like ways that you get away? You said you have 3 different kids. All of them are
Yeah.
boys. Do you like do special dates with them? Like, how does that look for them? You parenting them?
Well, I'll say we're still figuring it out.
Sure.
First of all,
I think everyone's
but
figuring that out right now.
yeah, and as kids get older, everything changes year after year. I've got my oldest is 12, and uh, that's quite the year, at least for him.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Thinking he's much older than he is, but still being a bit of a kid, and it's we're. I will say it's not that much different from when we lived in an apartment. You
Okay.
know, other than the fact that we're with them all the time, but my wife was always with them all the
Mhm.
time. Um, the challenge is more for us. It's not about being full-time RVers. It's about the fact that we both run this business full time,
Mm,
and when you run your own business, you always have the laptop in front of you, and it's you have to remember to like set your own hours and say, this is when I'm going to stop, this is when I'm going to have family time. And you can't think of like that you need to solve every problem at every minute that it comes up, because their problems are endless.
sure.
Especially what we do, like both of our websites are news based, so if there's something breaking, we feel the need to like go write about it right away,
Mhm.
and that sort of thing. And you just really have to at least have one of you making sure to take the time instead of both of you working all the time. And we started homeschooling before we started traveling. Our oldest is the only one that's ever went to a regular school. My wife grew up homeschooled,
Okay.
and our oldest went to kindergarten and first grade in Chicago public schools, and it was a challenge for him. So it was 35 kids in a classroom, and he had needs that weren't being met. My wife was really pushing for homeschooling, and I was reticent, and but at some point, I just realized that it wasn't working out for him, and we were doing just as much as work at home. So we started homeschooling, and that that opened up so much for us. That was another reason we were able to leave at any minute. But that there's so much freedom in the fact that you don't have to get up and drive your kid to school at 7 in the morning, and all that sort of stuff. Um, but that's also still one of the biggest challenges of trying to get them to do their work and not argue. And kids like to argue with
Sure.
you a little more than they would with another adult, and all that sort of stuff. But we do try to take time for each of them. I'll try to take one of them on a hike at some times. They all have different interests. My middle child um, is really into dance and ballet and
Mhm.
stuff, and my wife has a musical theater degree, so she'll often take him to a show somewhere. Or it doesn't matter where we are. If there's something going on, she might take him somewhere if we're back home with family. Um, the We don't often get time for my wife and I to be separate from the
Sure.
kids.
Yeah.
Um, but it happens sometimes. We meet lots of people on the road, lots of people in campgrounds, um, lots of people that are members of some of the organizations we're involved in, and sometimes we'll take turns, watching each other's kids and stuff like that. So it works out. There are positives and negatives, but overall, it's a net positive. The kids are learning a lot wherever we go. We get to say, like, we spent our first year, we spent 2 months in New Mexico, and we did a lot of studying of Native Americans,
Mhm.
and we get to go to all these Native American heritage sites and see how they lived, and be up close and personal with it, instead of just reading about it in a book. And that's worth everything.
Yeah, absolutely. We homeschool too. We've always done that. Our son, our oldest son, we just felt originally that he needed a little bit more one-on-one attention, and so we pulled our kids, or we started doing homeschool from the beginning. And yeah, like you were saying, there's days that it's my wife I think is ready to pull her hair out because they don't
Yeah.
listen to her like they would another adult. But I agree. I totally agree. Those trips that you can take and like make it real. Like when we did our 2 week trip, our 2 week trip a couple years ago, we were going along the Oregon Trail and we were doing all of those history things, and it's so real when you can experience it firsthand as opposed to just doing it in the book.
Yeah, yeah, we did a very similar thing to that. We followed most of the Lewis and Clark Trail,
Okay.
from St. Louis up to North Dakota and a little bit further. And my middle son got really into Lewis and Clark and exploration and bought spy glasses and things like that.
Awesome.
And it's fantastic to see them like really get interested into it and dive into it and learn something new without just sort of going through the motions.
Sure.
How would you say, like, with your guys' extended family, like how have they reacted to your guys' kind of lifestyle that you've taken on, and what does like connecting with family look like, kind of extended family and friends look like for you guys now in this season?
Well, for us, we in Chicago, we were about 3 hours from my parents, and that was the closest family. So it's different for a lot of people that hit the road full time. I know a lot of people face a lot of resistance from their family, especially if they live in a community where all their family's nearby. I mean, my aunt and uncle grew up my aunt and uncle live in the house next to my grandparents, which is where my dad grew up, and they still live in the same house, and everybody's in the same neighborhood, and they all have the same friends. And but when I moved to Chicago to go to school, I just stayed there. And had we still been in my home community, I think there would have been a little bit more resistance. But our family was incredibly supportive. My wife's family's in Kansas City, and then we have other family all across the country. My wife's uh, two of her brothers. One lives in Texas. One lives in L.A. I have a brother in L.A. My mother and my stepfather live in Tennessee. So we're actually able to get to see them more than we would have otherwise. And
Awesome.
we can go and spend extended periods of time. We'll spend a week or two or even a month at a time with some family and really get to have some close interaction where we really weren't before, because I was tied down to my work schedule. And if I needed to take time off, I got my 2 weeks a year off, and that was it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Is there a feeling of, I just wonder, like, uh, the idea of place. I'm getting a little esoteric, a little philosophical here, but the idea of having a home and a place, a cemented place where you go at the end of the day to, your inner sanctum, or whatever,
Yeah.
that safe place. Has that been, have you found that in the same way with what you're doing now, or was there a transition? I just kind of wonder what that, like, what home feels like to you as you guys are traveling the way you do.
Well, I feel like there are different sides to that coin. I feel like our trailer, we're no longer in the bus. Again, me not being a diesel mechanic, we had to get rid of our bus, and it needed an engine rebuild, and we bought a trailer. So now we live in that. But both the bus we were very possessive of. I mean, I built it with my own two hands and with the help of my kids, my wife, and I would bring one kid at a time down there to help me work on it and paint and all that stuff. So we really felt a deep connection with that. And no matter where we were, going home to the bus really felt like home. And our new trailer feels the same way as well. And we've had it for 9 months now, and it really does feel like home, like going to home, even more so than I think our apartment in Chicago did.
Mm.
We lived in that apartment for maybe 5 years, but I had, in the 16 years I was in Chicago, I probably had 12 different apartments. So none of them were I that attached to. Um, but the trade-off is like the neighborhood and the community and friends. I think that we left. That's the part of home that we miss.
Mhm.
And then we don't have like going to the neighborhood park. It's always the same every week, and meeting the same friends for play dates and stuff like that. Now, again, all of those friends that we had in Chicago, they've all moved too. So we're able to take our kids to see their friends that have moved to North Carolina and Wisconsin, and they still get to talk um, over the internet and that sort of stuff. So again, it's all trade-offs. It's all everything about RVing in general is trade-offs. You trade off size for freedom, and stuff um, for adventures. And and there are definitely trade-offs that you make in making that decision. And again, it's a net positive on our end, but there are things that we miss. And I guess if we could afford to have a house somewhere that we kept and do this lifestyle, maybe we would. I don't know. It would seem a little bit frivolous because we wouldn't be in it very
Right.
much.
Right. And like it fits who you are. And again, like you're saying, like it's great for the kids to be out and experience new things that they couldn't if you definitely had that house. So
Yeah.
you have recently had brain surgery. So let's talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that. And that's a huge thing for you. Tell me a little bit about that story.
So we had we usually spend a decent amount of the summer with family, because campsites can be hard to get to sometimes, and uh, summer is probably one of the best times to be in the Midwest, where most of our family is. So we had just been spending a decent amount of time with family and just gotten back on the road, and we're doing a whole tour of the state of North Dakota. Which, if North Dakota has this interesting thing. They have this, their tourism bureau has this tagline that's called "Save the Best for Last," because most people that are planning to see all 50 states, the last one they visit is North Dakota. So, and if that gives you any idea, that the state is 95% farmland. When people talk about like Kansas and Iowa being flat, North Dakota is super, super flat. Like technically it is one of the flattest states, if not the flattest. But there are so many cool, amazing things to do there. And we were having a lot of fun. We had gone to Fargo, we had gone to Grand Forks, and we were in this town called Minot, North Dakota, which is right in the center of the state. And we were there for a big RV convention, the Family Motor Coach Association's convention. And about 2 days into it, my eyesight started to get blurry, and then it would just go out and back in, like completely dark and back. And then I was getting a little bit of a headache, in the same spot on my head. Like if I would cough, I would feel a little bit of pain there, and I just thought it was a headache. Plus I was doing things, and I hadn't realized, for actually a couple weeks before that, I had been losing my peripheral vision, and that's something you don't really
Right.
notice. And I had been blowing through stop signs and things. I blew through 3 stop signs in 1 week.
Wow.
And we got in lots of arguments over it, because it was just like thinking that I'm just a bad driver or whatever, for whatever reason I'm not paying attention. But um then my vision started going completely out, and this was at like nighttime. It ended up being like 2 in the morning. I went to my wife and I said, look, I got to go to the hospital. I can't see. And to be honest, I knew exactly what it was when that happened. I was like, there's something on my brain clearly pushing on an ocular nerve. Like, this little headache I've been having is not nothing. I knew it was something like that. But I didn't say as much to my wife. But so we loaded the kids up in the truck, and she took me to the emergency room in this little medium-sized town of Minot, North Dakota. And I they assessed me there, and it just so happened that the neurosurgeon, the hospital has one neurosurgeon, and he happened to be there at 2 in the morning because he brought his daughter in because she was sick.
Oh wow.
And so he saw a request for a consult, and he looked at it right away, and he's like, look, there's something there. I mean, he showed me the photo, and there's like this mass about the size of, oh, I don't know, maybe like two 50-cent pieces, on my brain. And he said, it could be a few different things. It could be cancer. It could be an infection. We don't know, and it doesn't matter. It's got to come out regardless. So you're gonna have brain surgery tomorrow.
It's quick.
So
yeah.
So I called my wife, and he's like, because they didn't want it to do more damage, whatever it was. I called my wife, and I was like, now don't freak out. I'm gonna have brain surgery tomorrow. Luckily, it was up against my skull, so it wasn't like they had to like dig down in my brain. So they removed about 80% of it, and it ended up being an infection. This stuff called nocardia, which is a bacteria that's in the soil everywhere. And people rarely get infected with it. When they do, it's usually like pneumonia or something like that. Mine just happened to present itself on my brain. So they pulled out about 80% of it and stitched me back up with the skull piece missing. And I stayed about a week in the hospital, wore a helmet the whole time, and then I went home to the RV. Now this is now the beginning of October in North Dakota. Starts to get real cold.
Sure.
But we booked a monthly stay at the campground that was nearby there, and I ended up having to have antibiotics for about the next 8 weeks, IV antibiotics. So I had a port in my arm, and my wife had to go to the hospital 3 times a day to pick up the antibiotics because they expired an hour after they mixed them. So she would have to go get them, bring them back, administer them to me, and like 5 hours later, go back to the hospital and lather, rinse, repeat for the next 6 weeks. And it was rough. And God bless her. I'm so glad she was there for me.
Right.
I'm glad I was married and had, it was amazing to me though to find so much community there. Being not from there, not knowing anybody from around there. First of all, our friends from all over the country sent so much support. They sent so many care packages and stuff like that. Family members kept coming to us to visit. But the local community, really helped us out. My wife and kids got really close to everybody at the local library. Everybody that worked at the hospital was super supportive. We had like play dates for the kids with some of the pharmacists' children.
The
and
Starbucks
stuff
workers
like
got
that.
to know Abby real well.
She absolutely got to know her by first name. Yes, as they tend to do wherever we go. But yeah, it was wonderful to be able to realize that you can just sort of find community wherever you are. And then at the end of October, I went in to have a surgery there. We stayed there through that whole time to put the skull piece back in that was missing, still wearing a helmet all the time. And not a cool helmet, by the way, let me say. Clearly you have a head injury helmet.
Yeah.
And that surgery was unsuccessful. So we just gave up and headed back to my parents' house in Illinois and stayed with them for the next month and tried to figure out what to do. I ended up getting a surgery at the end of January to put a metal plate in my head. And from that point on, we've been back on the road. So
that's got to be super stressful to be in a place where you don't originally know anybody. Your wife has to take you to the hospital and then go back to hang out with your kids because you don't have anyone to watch your kids at that point.
Exactly.
That's going to be really stressful, but that's really cool to see how the community there came together and worked with you guys and supported you guys.
Yeah, and once I was able to get out and walk around, like they ended up giving me like an IV pump that I could wear like a purse and
nice.
be able to go to we went to that mall like 5 times a week. There was not much else to do, so we did stuff like that and hung out at the library all day and stuff. And I can't be more thankful to the people in that hospital, Trinity Hospital in Minot, and even being a small hospital, we've had lots of experience with some of the best hospitals in the world in Chicago. I had better care than I've ever had there. It was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, we're in these times where we are again reminded that the medical professionals and what they do and the care that they offer is it's like superhuman.
The people that I went to, I had 3 appointments a week, and those people I went to were in the infectious disease office, and I know every one of them by name, and I've met some of their kids and stuff like that. So I'm thinking of them going through this right now. And it's
absolutely.
I think about that a lot.
Jason, in your travels, obviously with this experience with this emergency surgery, but just in travels in general, what's your what's your view of mankind now? As you just, I mean, the opportunity. And again, me the extrovert thinks this way. The opportunity to interact with so many people from, I mean, multiple cultures, because I guess you're in the United States, but like obviously culturally there are significant
Yeah.
differences, all over the place. Uh, have are you encouraged? Are you discouraged? Do you think what's your perspective at this point?
Um, it's very it's very fractured. I mean, there's so many wonderful things that we come across, and a lot of one of my one of the things that has really struck with me over the first several months that we were on the road, is that we ran into a lot of communities that would be like that, you'd see on buildings and signage everywhere, like hashtag Aztec Strong, the name of the city Strong, meaning that they just had a school shooting. Um, and it never really occurred to me the many different communities that's been happening to.
Mhm.
We hear about the biggest ones, but there are a lot smaller ones. And then you drive through a community and you're like, why is this name sticking with me? Is because they had a school shooting 2 years ago, and now I'm recalling that. Stuff like that is challenging to process
Sure.
sometimes, because you really see, like, I mean, you go and see that we've been to like high school football games in places that we've gone to on the road, just because that's kind of fun
Mhm.
to do. And you see the people that has affected instead of seeing it on the news. I also think everybody underestimates each other, no matter where you're from. Somebody doesn't understand somebody from a different part of the country. From funny, humorous things to real serious stuff. Like, I mean, I've talked to people in New Orleans who were shocked that we have air conditioners in Chicago, and like they had no idea that we actually have air conditioners. Like, no, it actually gets over 100 degrees in Chicago in the summer. Stuff like that. But then also stuff like, being from Chicago, people are always asking me about the violence in Chicago. And, I tell them, like, yeah, it exists, but if you cut certain neighborhoods out of Chicago and called them a different name, Chicago would be one of the safest cities in the country. And, then I'll be driving through some of the back roads of the South, and you see all the street signs are shot up with bullet holes in them,
Mm.
because people feel free to, shoot their guns wherever they're, and whatever. But people are asking me about things being riddled with bullet holes in Chicago, and I'd never seen a bullet hole before in Chicago. I never had any sort of experience like that in my 16 years in Chicago. So it's just a lot of it, and then just not understanding what a state's all about. I mean, you think a state might be backwards to your beliefs, and then you go down there and you realize that there are all kinds of people of all different beliefs, and that's wherever you are. I mean, we
Mhm.
were in Mobile, Alabama, and this campground we're staying at, there's a flyer on the wall. We look at this flyer and see that it is for um, story time with a drag queen that is happening at the library. Mobile,
Huh.
Alabama, at the library, they have story time with a drag queen. And that's not something you would expect to be
No.
happening in Mobile,
No,
Alabama. But
no.
Mobile is actually a pretty open and free community. I mean, they've got they're actually a bigger an earlier Mardi Gras community than New Orleans
Mm.
was. So there's like quite the party atmosphere down there. But it's it just, wherever you are, there are people of all stripes everywhere.
Mhm.
Um and and I think we especially see that in campgrounds. Like, in campgrounds, people are generally on the very far ends of
Mhm.
the political spectrum. Particularly, I mean, you'll see RVs that have Trump flags flying over them, and then you'll see two lesbians getting out of another RV
Uh-huh.
that's got a pride flag flowing over it. And they get along, they're fine, they don't argue with each other and stuff. There's Campgrounds are usually a positive atmosphere, except for when people start getting rowdy. But it's interesting to realize that you can be talking to somebody and having a normal conversation with somebody that that you really don't believe at all in what they believe in. But they're still human, you know, and there's still more in common between us than what divides us.
Sure.
Good words.
Joel, is it time?
Boy, I think it is time.
It is time for the dudes and dads. Wait, hold on. I have a bumper here. Hold on.
Now it's time for the Dudes and Dads Pop Quiz.
All right. So those of you who have never joined us, this is a time where Joel and I just ask 6 to 8 random questions of Jason that he doesn't know that we don't know, and we just want to get to know him better. Because our goal for this show is to either have friends on the show or people we want to have become friends with, and so we just want to get to know you better, Jason. So Joel, why don't you kick this off with the first one?
All right, Jason, I'm going to put you on the hot seat on here. Favorite, let's see. Okay, so I'm guessing you've visited the national parks, or many of them, or been there. So
Quite a few, yeah.
Can you list a favorite national park so far?
Yeah, one of my top favorites is Voyageurs National Park, up basically on the border of Canada and Minnesota.
We are we're big Boundary Waters fans, so
Yay.
I 110% love that answer. Thank you.
I love getting back into those islands away from everything and seeing all the eagles nesting and the dark skies and canoeing through there. It's wonderful.
National parks are great. It's one of our favorite things to do. So my question is, what was your first vehicle that you ever owned as you know, a driver, you yourself?
I had a Chevy Astrovan, that blue mail truck box looking thing.
Nice.
That lots of people had back in the early 90s. It was 1 in 8 Astrovan keys fit another Astrovan. There were multiple instances of me getting in the wrong one. I mean, several, and because they were all the same color.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that happened quite, and you could even start them up. And I there was one time that I actually started driving, and I was like,
oh man,
oh shoot, this is not my stuff. That's not my CD on that seat there. Yeah.
That's awesome. Jason, what is your favorite, how we should say it, your maybe your dearest comfort item on the road? Like what's the one thing that you're just like, I love this thing and I have to have it with me to feel like all is right with the world?
Oh gosh. Wow. Let me see. I don't know that I have, you know, the sappy answer is my family. I am I really loving this knife I have, and I was never like a knife person before. But I've now have this knife that my stepfather gave me that is a Canadian Coast Guard knife, and it's super sharp and like rides on my hip, and I just love it. And I don't know why I never was that kind of person, but it's like now my thing. Like I go hiking in the woods, I gotta have my little knife on me.
That's
I don't
awesome.
use it for anything.
That's the kind of that's the kind of answer I was looking for. That's perfect.
All right. So as you created your bussy, schoolie, whatever you call it, what was the most challenging thing for you to do to learn to do for that?
Well, learning to do and doing were two different things. The most challenging thing to do was to remove the ceiling and the seats.
Wow, I would not.
Just because it took forever.
I would not expect that.
Yeah, well, each seat is bolted down by like 10 bolts, and the bolts go through the floor. So you make a decision to whether you're going to like put somebody under the bus with a wrench, and then somebody over the top inside with a wrench. That didn't work for us anyway because all the bolts were seized up. So you have to grind every single one of them off, and they're these incredibly hardened steel bolts, and it took me about a week to remove the seats.
Man.
And then the ceiling is all riveted in, and you have to like cut every single rivet or drill every single rivet out, and there's like probably 1,000, 1,500 rivets, and that is another thing that took me a good week to do. Like I said before, like the most difficult thing for me to learn was probably like diesel mechanic type stuff.
Sure.
And I did like a lot of serious repairs on our bus on the road. Like I we had some coolant leaks and all kinds of crazy little weird parts that needed to be changed out and fixed. And I, really had to dive deep and learn about that stuff. It was a challenge for not knowing anything about it.
Joel.
Okay. Let's see here. Oh, do you guys is there like a sound? I was going to ask if there's like some sort of soundtrack that you guys have. What your connection with music is, or is there like a favorite like is there like a favorite song that you like to have, maybe even right now on the road to head down the road to?
We all listen to very different music. I'll say that first. We all have, particularly my wife, myself, and my oldest son, all have very different tastes in music. But we all love to listen together to a few things. The soundtrack from the Muppet movie,
Nice.
with like Rainbow Connection and Moving Right
Yes.
Along, and those songs,
Yes.
great. And if you're familiar with these guys that do bad lip readings on YouTube,
Yes.
the Star Wars one, Seagulls Stop It Now,
Yes.
is we listen to that at least twice a week and have been for a good year.
That's awesome.
As you should, because it's amazing.
And every time we're driving somewhere. But when we're driving, we normally listen to podcasts and audiobooks.
Okay, great.
Good.
I think my last question, you said that you are of the theater community, and so what is either your favorite play and or musical?
Okay. I'd say my favorite play. Oh gosh. I think right now it's as it's sort of changed over the years. I'm probably going to go with a musical, and I'm just right now. I'm not one for favorites in general,
Okay.
but right now I'm like really into like the comedies. So if you're familiar with Book of Mormon, it's wonderfully raunchy, loving takedown of Mormonism, which is it's so bad that it's good.
Yes.
And it's the South Park creators, and
Yep.
it's wonderful. So I'm into that kind of stuff.
Joel, any last question from you?
Let's see here. What's the okay? So we can't top brain surgery on the road, but what is the weirdest thing that has happened to you guys so far?
Oh man, weird. A lot of challenging things. Had some like weird animal noises and stuff. So okay, I'll give you this one. This is actually just before we started traveling full time. We were doing a lot of tent camping, and that basically that year before we started building out the bus, we were camping at this park in Wisconsin. No, it was in Michigan, and there was something large and loud sniffing around our tent.
Ooh.
Right? And I mean, it seemed like it could be nothing other than a bear. It absolutely had to be a bear of some sort. So I was kind of freaked out, but I got my flashlight out and opened up unzip the window of the tent and roll it down and look out there and take my flashlight out to it, and I see the largest raccoon you have ever seen. Our trash was hanging from, like, they have like these things you can hang your trash from, these posts, and our trash was probably 4 feet off the ground, and it's on its hind legs, like eating our trash.
Oh man,
it's like the size of a pig. And I think that was probably the strangest thing we were having, and we left that next day.
Yeah, they grow those raccoons big up there. They do. It's the Michigan air. I don't know.
I'll say one more really cool thing that we
Yes.
saw that was strange at first because I didn't know what the heck was happening. We were in New Mexico 2 years ago, middle of the desert, beautiful empty skies, and I mean there was a UFO over our head. There was like this large or this large, like, glowing cloud of white with this thing at the tip of it moving forward. It was beautiful and brilliant, and was all these like really glowing gases around it and stuff. It ended up being a SpaceX rocket.
Wow.
I found out the next morning. But I mean, I never thought a SpaceX rocket would look like
No.
that. And it certainly looks like, we had just been to Roswell and gone to the UFO museum and all that sort of stuff. And then there's this thing in the sky that I can't explain.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
you have successfully passed the Dudes and Dads pop quiz.
Well done, Jason. Well
Thank you.
done. Well done.
Thank you again
Yes.
for being on our show. But before we let you go, obviously we said you were a podcaster and you're a blogger. So go ahead and plug all of your podcasts and all of the stuff that you do so that our listeners can find you.
Sure. So we run the RV Miles website, rvmiles.com, and we write news stories about traveling in the RV industry. And there you'll also find our podcasts. We have 3 podcasts. The RV Miles podcast is about RVing and full-time RVing, and camping and U.S. travel. We talk about where we go and what we've done and all the cool things that we get to find on the road. And then we have the America's National Parks podcast, which is sort of a narrative scripted podcast where we tell the history or something that's going on at a National Park Service site somewhere in the country. And then we have our newest podcast, which is the See America podcast. We launched that literally in the middle of my brain surgery epidemic there. We had like 2 weeks. I was writing it in the first episode in the hospital, and it sort of gave me something to do when we got out. So when I got out of the hospital, we started recording them. So See America is very similar to the National Parks podcast in that it's narrative and it's about the history of different cool places that we experience around the country. But it's obviously, it's just not national parks. It's
Right.
like roadside attractions and museums and stuff like that. So
Very,
that's
very
where you can
awesome.
find us all over social media doing the same stuff, same names.
Yeah, and as always, everybody will have all of their good info on our website over at dudesanddadspodcast.com. So you can check it out in the show notes. We'll make sure to give links and all the good information. But Jason, again, you're our hero, man. We appreciate you.
Thanks so much.
This
I'm
it's
humbled
awesome.
by that.
It's awesome. We're we know where to go for all of our traveling advice moving forward. So thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.